Hello everyone. Welcome back. Today, we've got some crucial news you don't want to miss. Let's dive right into the top financial headlines and break down what's happening. Right now, global capital markets are under a cloud of negativity. Some folks are even saying the Christmas rally is over. A few investment banks are spreading some pretty grim predictions, like a major market drop in January. But instead of getting lost in all these uncertain guesses, maybe it's a good idea to focus on things that are more certain. That's a mindset worth adopting, especially when things feel up in the air. When you're stuck in a state of uncertainty and anxiety, it doesn't really solve anything. Instead, find clear, actionable things you can focus on. A Yahoo Finance article today really caught attention because, amid all this market confusion, they found something with more clarity. The article's headline reads, "All 2025, a tailwind for Trump as Wall Street projects lower crude prices." Right now, people are feeling uneasy about the market because there's no clear direction. But Yahoo Finance highlighted a solid, predictable trend. With global oil supply increasing, oil prices could go down under President Trump's leadership. According to Natasha Karneva, head of JP Morgan's global commodities strategy, the demand for oil isn't the main concern. The global demand is expected to slow down from 1.3 million barrels per day this year to 1.1 million next year. Instead, the real challenge is oversupply. With demand weakening and Trump possibly pushing big support for U.S. oil companies, JP Morgan's team predicts Brent crude prices will average $80 per barrel in 2024, falling to $73 by the end of 2025. Meanwhile, U.S. oil could drop even further, possibly to $65 per barrel. Francisco Blanche, head of global commodities and derivatives research at Bank of America, also said this month that oil shortages aren't a worry, and they're taking a more bearish view for 2025. Wall Street sees this as a positive sign for Trump's plan to lower energy prices by easing regulations. Trump himself has said he wants to fast-track pipeline, drilling, and other infrastructure projects at an unprecedented level. Why does Trump's oil policy have the potential to shake up the global oil market? Well, the US has been the world's top oil producer for 6 years now, producing 20% of the world's oil. Yahoo Finance even mentioned an extreme scenario. If Trump somehow gets Russia to play ball and ends the war in Ukraine, sanctions could be lifted on Russia, and its oil could flood back into the global market. This could cause prices to drop drastically, possibly even to $50 per barrel in the short term. What's interesting here is that Wall Street's analysis is pretty solid, with a lot of logic behind it. Before reading their take, most of us would just jump on the latest uncertainty, doom and gloom, or risks. But when you break down the global oil market this way, it makes a lot of sense. And if you dig deeper into this, you could start connecting the dots on how falling oil prices might affect other markets, like commodities. It's a great example of how thinking with clarity and focusing on certain trends can lead you to more actionable insights. This kind of mindset could really be useful for anyone trying to navigate today's markets. Today's second major news update, the death of former US President Jimmy Carter. So, the big news today is the passing of former President Jimmy Carter. Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? After all, he's no longer in office, and it's just another former leader passing away. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll realize that Carter's death carries much more weight, both politically and culturally, than most of us might expect. First, let's focus on how Carter's death affects the capital markets. Bloomberg has a fascinating take on how the passing of a former president can ripple through the global financial world. You might not think that the death of a former leader would have much impact on stocks or bonds, but in reality, it does. Following the White House's announcement that January 9th would be a national day of mourning for Carter, the market responded. Both the New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq announced that they would be closed for the day. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange also decided to close its futures markets. Now, here's the interesting part. The bond market, which is much larger than the stock market in the US, won't be completely closed. Instead, it will only close for half the day, at 2 p.m. New York time, based on recommendations from the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association. This isn't a law or rule set by the government, it's a decision made by the market players themselves. And this isn't the first time. The practice of closing markets to mourn a former president goes way back, since 1865, in fact, when the US stock markets closed after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. Over the years, the same practice has been followed after every US president's death. Other countries have followed a similar pattern. For example, when Queen Victoria of the UK passed away, or when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, their stock markets closed as well. It's a way of recognizing the significance of certain figures, showing respect, and acknowledging their impact on history. On the other hand, let's take a look at how the media is reflecting on Carter's legacy. The second interesting aspect of Carter's death is how the media is portraying his legacy. Depending on where you look, the tone can be quite different. For example, Bloomberg had an interesting headline that labeled Carter as good man, middling president. They acknowledged his brilliance and his personal virtues, but pointed out that he never fully grasped the dark arts of presidential power, meaning he struggled with the more pragmatic side of politics. Bloomberg pointed out that Carter's rise to the presidency was a result of the disillusionment people had with politicians, especially after the Nixon scandal. Carter, coming from a humble farming background, appeared as an honest and straightforward leader. However, his tenure in office was marked by inefficiency, and historians generally rank him as one of the more mediocre presidents. On the other hand, the Washington Post took a much more idealized view of Carter. The headline read, "America's Most Misunderstood President," claiming that Carter's faith-driven actions were a lifetime of good deeds, and that his true contributions were largely unrecognized during his presidency. The article seems to suggest that Carter's idealism and moral approach to politics were simply too ahead of their time for many Americans to appreciate. Then, there's the Wall Street Journal. Their headline was "The Misunderstood Consequences of Jimmy Carter's Presidency," and they focused on how Carter's presidency paved the way for outsiders like Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump to win the White House. They argued that Carter's presidency made it more acceptable for someone with no real political experience to run for office and potentially succeed. The Economist, in its usual fashion, took a more detached view, calling Carter perhaps the most virtuous of all America's presidents. They were keen to note that while US presidents may not always be known for their ethical standards, Carter stood out for his moral compass, and that was something even his critics could respect. However, perhaps the most interesting response came from Donald Trump, who had some pretty candid remarks about Carter. Trump, known for his blunt and often divisive comments, posted a heartfelt tribute to Carter on his social media platform. Trump acknowledged that, while they had major philosophical and political differences, Carter was a man who truly loved and respected the country. He wrote that Carter worked hard to make America a better place and even referred to him as a good man. Trump's message was a rare moment of praise from him toward a former president, reflecting a level of respect that goes beyond party lines. From all these different perspectives, one thing is clear: Jimmy Carter may not have been the most successful president in terms of policy accomplishments, but he was undoubtedly a man of integrity and moral conviction. Whether it was through his humanitarian work after his presidency or his unwavering faith, Carter's legacy is complicated but certainly impactful. What's particularly striking, though, is how different people, from political analysts to global leaders, view his time in office. Some see him as a tragic failure who couldn't navigate the world of politics, others see him as a figure who represented hope and integrity in an era of political turmoil. In the end, Carter's death serves as a reminder of how much history, politics, and legacy are intertwined, and how different people can interpret the same period in American history in very different ways. Whether you agree with his politics or not, it's clear that Jimmy Carter will always be remembered as a man of principle, whether he was fully appreciated during his time in office or not. The third piece of important news I want to share with you guys today is related to the war in Ukraine. There are two updates that caught my attention. First up, Reuters is reporting that Moscow says, thanks to mediation by the UAE, Russia and Ukraine have swapped 150 prisoners. The Russian Ministry of Defense released a statement saying that both sides carried out a prisoner exchange on Monday, freeing 150 war prisoners in total. According to the report, the Russian captives were released in Belarus and will be transferred back to Russia soon. The statement also mentioned that the UAE played a key role as a mediator in this exchange. It's definitely some good news to hear. Now, the second piece of news is a bit tougher, especially if you're someone who supports Ukraine. But I think you guys, especially those who follow this channel, can handle it. We like to bring you the good news, of course, but we can't ignore the hard truths either. So, here's the deal. Bloomberg reported that US officials are warning that Ukraine could lose all the Russian territory it has gained in just a few months. The headline says, US officials say Ukraine could lose all territory it gained from Russia. They went on to say that by the spring, Ukraine might be forced to pull out of Kursk. Earlier this year, Ukraine had launched a sudden offensive and seized about 1,000 square kilometers of land in the Russian region of Kursk. But now, they've already lost half of that, with just 500 square kilometers left. And there's a real chance they could lose the rest within a few months. This could take away a key bargaining chip Ukraine had in potential peace talks with Russia. This news shows just how brutal the situation on the ground is. It's a reminder that while we're cheering for Ukraine and boosting morale, we can't forget that Russia is still one of the world's top 2 military powers. On a related note, there are also reports saying that Ukraine is gearing up to open a second front inside Russia itself. So, yeah, while there's good news to report, the reality of war is often much tougher than we want to admit. Fourthly, here's a Reuters report I came across today. The headline reads, Syria appoints some foreign Islamist fighters to its military, sources say. So, here's how the report goes. According to 2 Syrian sources, Syria's new rulers have placed several foreign fighters in key positions within the country's military. These include Uyghurs, Jordanians, and Turks. Damascus is trying to piece together various rebel groups to form a more professional army. While the new government promised not to export Islamic revolution and has shown a more tolerant attitude toward Syria's many minority groups, appointing jihadists to official positions, some of which are quite senior, could raise concerns among foreign governments and Syrian citizens about the regime's true intentions. The Syrian government spokesperson declined to comment on requests for clarification about these appointments. The sources mentioned that at least 6 foreign nationals were among the 50 senior generals announced by the Ministry of Defense on Sunday. This includes 1 Uyghur. Now, I want to share my thoughts on this. Before the fall of Assad's regime in Syria, the Sam Liberation Army wasn't a big player compared to other rebel forces. It didn't have as much power as the US-backed Kurdish fighters, who still control about a third of Syria's territory today. But for some mysterious reason, the Sam group managed to push Assad out of power and somehow took the lead of the country. But whether the many former anti-Assad groups will actually follow the Sam group's leadership is still up in the air. That's one reason Israel is keeping a close watch on this group. They don't trust former Al-Qaeda affiliates to suddenly turn peaceful. And Israel definitely doesn't trust these guys. Right now, the Sam group has ousted Assad, and they're calling the shots. But what's next? Just today, they appointed a woman as the governor of Syria's central bank, seemingly a shift away from the extreme Islamic position seen before. However, with the appointment of so many foreign Islamic militant leaders as senior generals in Syria's military today, this sends a very mixed message. According to Reuters, the Uyghur leader appointed today is named Atis Dawood Hudaberdi. His group is called the TIP, Turkestan Islamic Party. This group currently has hundreds of fighters and aims to establish an Islamic state in parts of China and Central Asia. What's interesting is how China has responded to all this. Despite the global uproar over this news, the Chinese Foreign Ministry refused to comment when asked by Reuters. So, it seems like the Chinese government is a bit caught off guard by all of this. In the end, we really need to be cautious about how things will unfold in Syria. The situation is still very uncertain. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more updates. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.